I want to welcome our distinguished panel and take a few minutes to introduce the subject and perhaps not to guide their remarks, but certainly to orient us all to one central place so that we can deliberate together. We're looking at the role of international institutions in countering terrorism. And the first thing right off the mark, which we know to be true, is that the global counterterrorism architecture is made up of a dense and complex web of relationships that are mostly bilateral, mostly enfolded within the intelligence and military and political systems of states, and that entire network made up of these bilateral and sometimes regional relationships responds to quite covert and transnational threats that go across the spectrum of terrorism, drug and human trafficking, illicit weapons, etc. And those particular sets of illegal activities interact with each other in very particular ways. This architecture is demand-driven. It is not permanent. It always shifts with the events that it is being asked to respond to. And that is what gives it its complexity, because today Kenya may be dealing with India on a very particular issue, and tomorrow those issues could shift, even as each of our countries shifts in relation to our other partners. That architecture built of member states and their security and political agencies is where the bulk of financial and human resources reside. A lot of that architecture is hidden from plain sight. It does not share what it knows freely, and it has very strict protocols on how it engages in terms of exchanging meaningful, actionable information. It is also inside that state architecture where the data, the knowledge, and very often the expertise lives in. Now, when you consider that reality, the question then becomes, what can international organizations add to it? And I think that's partly what we're here to answer. We know that international organizations as a whole are poorly resourced. They never have enough money, even when they appear to have a lot of money. We know that international organizations and their officials are largely closed off from the intelligence and security architecture of counterterrorism. In other words, there's no one who works daily on counterterrorism who I know calls an officer of the United Nations every morning. The UN and other international platforms sometimes are captive to virtue signaling and norm intervention. They're used to show that you're good, and they're used to promote notions of the good. And I'm not denigrating those ideas. I'm just saying a lot of times they're there for signaling purposes. And that sometimes runs completely counter to the existence, the daily existence of operational counterterrorism officers. Very often, international platforms are catchment areas for academic researchers and their debates. For instance, the very important debate on definitions, as I think my colleague here from Israel said, really makes no sense at all to the terrorists themselves. And certainly, if you're engaging in counterterrorism, those sorts of issues of definition, as important as they are, do not form a part of your daily life in any meaningful sense. So the question would then become, what are the key competencies of international organizations? If they were branches of General Electric at the time when Jack Welch was the CEO, and he used to say, if you're not in the core business, I'll close you down, what would international organizations say is their core competence? I'm sure they would talk about common approaches. I'm sure they would talk about the counterterrorism strategies, the PVE strategy by the Secretary General recently, and all the variety of other resolutions, both at the UN and at the regional level. I'm sure they can talk a little bit about building of new architectures, and I'm sure they can talk a lot about bringing certain skills to the table, to countries that need those skills or to specific sectors within countries that need those skills.